Great.
Hey, Carl, welcome to the podcast for the third time.
Yeah, good to be back.
So we've been chatting over the last couple of months, and you've been putting together a course for swimmers specifically, working on more functional movements that will help people either avoid getting injured, but I think probably more importantly is those people that have got recurring injuries, how can they overcome them, and how can they develop strength through those certain areas where they are consistently getting injured, and how can they do it so that they don't need to take time out of the pool. And you want to talk a little bit about some of those exercises that you have been recording in the course, and also sort of how it came about and what your background is with working with swimmers?
Yeah, sure. I've been doing this for 20 years now, working with exercises. And early on in my profession, I noticed that many of the sort of traditional exercises and stretching routines were not working for a lot of patients and clients, particularly with low back and shoulders and knee issues. And then I realized that many of the movements that we're giving were not movements that were necessarily functional or movements the body was designed to do, even though they were scientific. And so for the last basically 2 decades, I've been researching and rediscovering what the body's functional movements look like and how to master the techniques to do them. And in this 6-week course, I really share a lot of my insights and the functional movements that I've been working on in the course, that's to give a really good solid foundation to help people to move in the way that I believe the body is designed to move. And it's when you move in the what I call the body's method for exercises, then you get great results, particularly with shoulders and low back.
Yeah, I'm watching through the videos from the course, and also having been doing a lot more strength than I was in the past with not being able to swim right now. It seems like a lot of the issues that people probably get from doing strength work incorrectly, or from doing normal swimming and they get injured. A lot of it seems like it comes from the movements not being sort of functional. So sort of full body movements where they're probably just isolating or loading up too much through their lower back or through their shoulders. Is that what it seems like from your end?
Absolutely. We've so been trained to isolate muscles or focus on a particular joints, and then this whole idea of body weight, so using the whole body to generate power, particularly the shoulder. And it's a good topic in terms of injuries, because a lot of shoulder workouts or recovery programs try and strengthen, for example, rotator cuff. So they focus on rotator cuff strengthening exercises or bicep strengthening exercises, where the shoulder so much connects to the hips and to the whole body. So it's learning through in the class and the course how do you generate power with all the big muscles helping the shoulder.
Yeah, and that's what I've liked about watching through as you go through the exercises. I mean, I've been doing I'd say probably half the exercises just in my weekly strength and conditioning stuff lately. And I know I've been doing some of them wrong after watching the videos. And what I like about, talk about the serape effect and how can we generate that power through our hips and through our upper body. And like, it doesn't require a massive change in the way that you do exercises, but it's this little minor 10% change that can really, I think, develop that serape effect and connection through the body, which is really key in swimming. And I mean, I was talking to a physio a couple months ago about just one long distance swimmer that he was working with. And I don't know if we talked about this last time, but this guy had shoulder issues all the time. And one of the things that this physio found is that he wasn't kicking at all, like his legs just dragged behind him. And so it was loading up his shoulders too much. So he didn't have that stabilization through the kick that's transferred through the body. And that's a good example of someone who's not having that connection through the body and not using that serape effect. So that's what I think some of these exercises are really good for in developing that, but it doesn't need a massive change at all for a lot of people.
No, just to learn, to experience and to feel. We talked about that in one of our last podcasts, that connection, just how the whole body's connected. And so just for as they work through the exercises, they'll start to really train that what does it feel like, because as you say, you don't want to be having 2 left arms or 2 right feet. You can, with the exercise, it'll help to build that connection, which I think is very powerful, especially for swimmers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I put out a survey about who's got recurring injuries that stop them from or impact their swimming. And I think it was 44% of people said they do. So nearly half the people that who are probably adults. So, most of our swimmers are sort of 30 to 60 years of age. Almost half of them have got recurring injuries. And if they can get rid of those injuries, or they can develop the strength to be able to overcome them, then it's going to mean that they can spend longer in the water, where they're not having 1 or 2 or 3 weeks out. And it means that they can keep that build of their training going. So they're not having to take these ongoing periods of time out. And so one of the most common ones that popped up was shoulder issues. This is obviously one of the main ones with swimming, is shoulder issues, particularly rotator cuff. Where do you see a lot of those issues coming from for swimmers that you've worked with?
Well, for especially for not the elite athletes, but it's swimmers, would be obviously posture plays a major role. And one of the huge benefits of moving functionally is you'll see a great results and changes in posture straight away. And then obviously not balancing the opposing muscles. So if swimmers if they're just working on the pulling action, they're not on the pushing action. So we see that that's one of the things I address in the course as well, just how to train and strengthen, balance the muscles. So that asymmetry that we see in swimmers. I said posture, but obviously people who work at a desk bound most of the day, that puts a lot of strain on the body. Then we also talked about a lot of upper back stiffness, the thoracic spine, your upper back, a lot of stiffness up through which is related to posture again, can be related to posture. Often just loosening up the upper back has huge benefits for releasing shoulder problems. And as you know, in swimming, it's quite a lot of rotation and movement depending on the strokes you're doing, but you need that mobility, which is key for shoulders. And often with shoulder problems, it's not even the shoulder. It can even be, as we know, it can be the hip, back. It's complex, but by moving function, it's the key thing I want to get to the swimmers, is by moving function, it's almost like it resets the body, and it's just the effects are great.
And for someone who's listening to this and thinking, yeah, all right, that's me, I'm pretty stiff, my upper back, sometimes got issues with the shoulders, and it might stop me from swimming, or it might just mean I can't go as hard as I'd like to, but I can't be bothered putting in the work. What would you say how much does it take for someone to make a change to the things that we're talking about, to their mobility and to the way that they move? How long do you think it is for someone from the get-go to see those changes and to notice them? And then how long until they can see not necessarily a permanent change, but a change that is really noticeable?
Sort of referred to as the minimum effective dosage, in a sense. You don't need to be doing hours and hours a day. If you could choose maybe 2 or 3 of those exercises, specifically for the shoulder, and do them almost every day for 5 to 10 minutes, or even in between, like what I call movement snacks. So if you're at your desk and you stand up and do a few movements or mobility exercises that are literally 2 to 3 minutes, then you can see changes pretty quickly. A lot of clients have actually, after even a week, they're not going to see major posture changes, but they're going to feel differences in mobility changes in the shoulder.
Yeah, and I find with a number of things, for me, it's like a sort of a 5 to 6 week turnaround of doing something consistently. And I talked about this in a recent YouTube video for most people, I think when they get back into the pool after taking, say, 2 or 3 months off with all of the lockdown stuff happening, for most people, I reckon they can get back to where they were, pretty close to it, within about 6 weeks if they're training relatively intensively, or 8 to 10 weeks if they're just sort of easing their way back for most people. Now, obviously, elite athletes are different. They were training 10 times a week, and it's a different story. But yeah, I think 5 to 6 weeks, you can really notice it. And that's what I've noticed getting back into strength training now, since I haven't been able to swim, is I was feeling so sore the first 2 to 3 weeks of the strength training. But now I'm not pulling up as sore. And I'm noticing the change physically in how I feel, particularly the strength through the core and through the hips, and how I move and how I walk. And then in terms of posture and how you carry yourself, like it really transfers to a lot of different aspects of your life. And my shoulder, because I came off the mountain bike 7 months ago, and so I was having issues with it. I haven't swum obviously much lately, but my shoulder has improved dramatically. So I haven't had any issues. And that's for surfing for like 6 or 7 hours a day sometimes, whereas before it was pulling up sore after 2 or 3 hours. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes when I get back in the water and swim. But that strength training so far, I've noticed, has made a big difference. So I think that seems to be a real key to overcoming those sorts of injuries or issues.
With the shoulders, we talk about a ball and socket joint. It needs to be mobile.
Mm.
And again, some of the listeners may be familiar with fascia. So it's quite a big term now. It's myofascial stretching, and you've got those foam rollers, and there's a lot of benefits to that. But with the functional movements, when you start to train all the muscles in the right sequences, and again functionally, you'll see that the fascia actually starts to reorganize itself without having to do hectic and painful stretches. So for those who love to do the stretches, it's fine. But also for those who aren't maybe want to spend hours stretching every week, just simply moving it's incredible how the body reorganizes itself, and that gives a lot of mobility to the shoulder. Because if you've got tight fascia, as you know, pec fascia, or it really can limit mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's because I've done next to no mobility work lately, but just moving better and doing, like, we've been doing a bit of stuff on the ground. Like I've been taking some junior swimmers through some strength training, and we've been doing some like lying on the floor on your chest and Y raises, the YW stuff. You lift your chest off, bring your hands up above your head, bring them back, and some movements like that, and angels and demons as well, which is kind of where you start up here and bring your hands back behind your bum. A few different exercises like that as well. And I feel like that stuff is it's not a strain at all. It's you're not working at the complete limit of your mobility, but you might be working at, say, 80% of it. But those sorts of movements, and just doing them regularly for 6 weeks has made things so much better. And one of the things that you do, or you talk quite a bit about in the course, is core strength and squatting, and sort of, I guess, that connection, that strength that you can have through the hips. Do you want to talk a little bit about those sorts of functional movements and how they relate to swimming, and how that can actually develop core strength? Because I think, when you first mentioned squatting is one of the best ways to develop core strength, I was like, I've never sort of heard that before. But the more I've sort of looked into it, it's like, it's one of the best things you can do for your core strength.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's so funny. You said, I just had a patient yesterday. He said, "What are you talking about?" And then I explained to them. They said, "I can't believe my tummy is in my core. It feels like I've done like a whole bunch of planking." I said, "Yeah, it's because you're not connected." But for swimmers, that connection, the mobility in the hips and the core and that rotational component, it's just by doing the squatting technique correctly or functionally, you actually open up the lower back. You get the core muscles to fire, and the core muscles. When I talk about core, it's talking about your abdominals here as well. But the core actually involves all your big trunk muscles, so your pecs, your lats, your glutes, your hip flexors. So, but in terms of what a lot of people associate core with would be the abdominals, but they've got to work together with the glutes, your buttocks muscles, and so it's the squatting action, when done correctly, activates all those muscles beautifully, and it also has a tremendous effect on the whole spine, not just your lower back. And when that lower back and the back loosens up, then you've got the mobility, and when you've got the rotational freedom or improvements in mobility there, then you've got that better connection with the Serape effect and the whole sort of movement you go through in the course. So squatting is, from a fat burning, from a metabolic efficiency to back improvements in backs, joint health, mobility, strength. I mean, I could have a whole podcast just on squatting, and we go through that in the course. It's really, in fact, if the average person doesn't like to exercise, just did those squats, they would see improvements in shoulder mobility and posture 2 to 3 weeks by doing that.
With some of the junior kids that I've been doing some strength work with, some of them at the very beginning, they were squatting maybe that far down, as in like from where the hips, they weren't hardly squatting, right? And so you're just not going to get anything from it. And so it's something that, I see my young kids, they're able to do the squatting, but I think a lot of times as you get a bit older, these kids aren't old, they're like 11 or 12, some of them. We just either forget, or we just don't do that movement, and we don't do it properly. And I know for me personally, like, so tight through my hips. I'm good now, but I have been in the past so tight through my hips from sitting in the car for hours at a time, or sitting at a desk, and plus your hip flexors get tight. And so when I've been opened up by doing these exercises and sometimes a little bit of yoga as well, I find really useful. It's like, man, you can
Yes.
be so much stronger through the hips. And I'm looking forward to getting back in the pool tomorrow for my first swim back in the pool, and just seeing how it feels with this better strength. Because I reckon for me, it's probably the strongest I've been through my core and through my hips in the last probably 12 or 13 years. And so I'm looking forward to seeing
Okay,
how
great.
that feels and how that relates to swimming in the water.
Yeah. And the thing is, we talked about core strength, and I do share this in the videos, but is that we've got to get away from that sort of burning feeling that you get in the olden days. We used to lift your legs up in the air and do your 1,000 sit-ups, to really feeling all the muscles work together, and that's really where you get the power. And yeah, as I said, so I'm not going to really mention, but squatting is a very, very powerful and functional. It's the foundation to all the. If you look at tennis players when they have to receive the tennis ball, how they stand in that squat position, karate, surfing, any snowboard, any sort of sport where even before you go into rugby, into the scrum, they get into that position. It's what I call the body's power position.
Mm. And I think in swimming, it's sometimes harder to see than a lot of other sports, because like, yeah, you can see obviously the hips are rotating a bit, and but it's really hard to sort of notice and understand that connection when you're watching someone swim, because it's so, I guess it's so sort of intricate. But yeah, if you look at someone, say, surfing or playing rugby, like with someone surfing, for example, if you look at it slowly, you look at someone sort of generating speed, they'll compress and then they'll
Correct.
come up, and it's that movement
Yes.
through the hips, and it's really well timed with the feet and through the hips and so on. And it's the same, essentially the same sort of thing through swimming, but it's a lot easier to see in other sports that are land
Correct.
based and I guess more obvious movements than swimming.
For the swimmers, what it is that the squatting, when we talk about doing it properly, is it really unlocks the hips and the back, and it provides that mobility you need in swimming. And one of the key parts of the spine is in the middle back, but just as the middle back goes into the lower back, you got the rotational component. And when that is very common, locked or stiff in a lot of people, and so what happens is your lower back then overworks, and that's where you go to chiros or osteophysios, who then start to manipulate and release that tension. When you start to do the squatting properly, you start to release that rotational transitional area in the spine, and that then connects the whole body. That's where you get all this movement from. So you really see the benefits. The squatting may not have a direct effect on your swimming, like you just clearly pointed out, but it's that the release you get from doing squats in the back that then translates to the swimming.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. And it's so you're saying that that lower part of the back is often quite tight, quite compressed, and so that's going to limit someone's ability to generate that power from the
Yes.
hips.
Your lower back, as I described in the course, your lower back can't actually rotate. So it doesn't have the rotational component. It's got to do with the orientation of the joints. So your lower back's designed for flexion, extension. There is a little bit of rotation on what we call the L5-S1, right at the bottom of the base of your spine. But most of the rotation takes place up higher up in the spine. And there's a transitional area where the spine goes from rotation to flexion, extension, and that's often quite tight. And a lot of physios and chiros work around trying to loosen it up. But I've discovered over the years, by doing the squats, that area loosens up quite quickly. And that's where the power comes, because when that loosens up, then now your body can function correctly, and then you've got connection, really.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. And for you, is there any any people that come to mind who have, let's say, come to you? They've been really tight. They've had issues with either shoulder or lower back or knees, whatever it might be, and they've practiced this stuff for a number of weeks, and they've been able to operate without pain and that sort of thing. Have you got any people who come to mind?
If it's related to those physical limitations, absolutely. I'm actually quite surprised how quickly people will tell me how their mobility improves. We have this idea, you've mentioned 5 to 6 weeks, and yes, it does take that time to build strength. But in terms of often even just releasing the back can be a day, a week. It's quite very, very interesting to see how quickly. Depends on the person, and the issues. But it's really I've noticed in my own journey, I started off as a Pilates instructor, and I couldn't do the next level 3 Pilates because I didn't have the mobility. And I was quite frustrated because I was thinking, well, if I'm doing Pilates, I should be improving my mobility. And I realized I moved away from Pilates about 10 years ago and started really looking into this functional. And after even just simply squatting again, it sounds like I'm trying to promote the squat, but just squatting, my mobility radically improved within a day or two. It doesn't take, that's the big thing about flexibility. It doesn't need to be hours and hours and weeks of stretching. Once the right muscles work, you can improve your flexibility quite quickly, which I think is really exciting for the average person who doesn't want to spend hours doing gym. And those who do yoga and Pilates, it's also, it complements that, because now they can go to their classes and do their stretching and really shift to the next level.
I think the people, those that are listening to this, they're probably going to jump off the podcast and just start doing some squats for the hell of it. And I know last time I had you on, I know last time I had you on and you talked a bit about the squat. I started doing squats where I hadn't really done them for years, and so it's a good thing. And but you want to make sure that you're doing them right, because I know people who've done them wrong, and for most of the time it's giving them a bit of pain in the lower back by not doing it right, or often pain in the knees as well. So you want to make sure that you're doing that in the right way. So thanks very much for being on the podcast. And so the course, I'll put a link in the show notes for this, and it'll be on our website as well for the course. And it's a 6-week program that will take you through all the fundamental movements that you should be doing if you are doing any sort of swimming. And as we mentioned, it doesn't need to take a lot of time. A couple minutes a day will make a big difference. And if you are doing any sort of gym work, then I'd highly recommend going through this course, because just a way to make these movements much more functional and sort of all body movements that's going to help you not have shoulder pain, going to keep you in the water and allow you to just maintain that training without having to take big chunks of time out of the water.
Brilliant. No, welcome. Thanks for having me, and look forward to the feedback from the guys who did the course.
Yeah, awesome. And those that are in our membership as well, you're going to be in there answering any questions that they've got. If anyone's got specific issues, they can either contact you through your website, or if they're an Effortless Swimming member, then jump in the forum there, and you'll be in there helping out as well, which would be great. So thank you.
Looking forward to it, Brenton. Thanks for having me.